The Fallout series has plenty of weapons that don't really take themselves too seriously. While Fallout 4 doesn't have as many as some of the prior games, it still has a couple weapons that really do fit the description. One of those being from the Far Harbor DLC, and the focus of today's video, I'm going to ask if you can beat Fallout 4 using only the Harpoon gun. I wasn't really too sure how to spread out my specials for this run, since I've never really used the Harpoon gun before. I figured just taking the normal perks like Heavy Gunner and Gun Nut as well as Idiot Savant would make the run pretty easy. I'm sure you'll notice the game doesn't exactly look normal, and this is because I found a few mods that kind of fit the season that I wanted to use for this video. I'm using two mods, one of which is Whispering Hills, the other is a mod called Grim, to kind of give the game a more horror vibe since I'm recording this video around Halloween. You'll notice that I'll end up fighting some monster enemies later on in the run as they harass me, and the run just generally is not going to look like normal Fallout due to the kind of horror atmosphere that I've given it with some mods. First things first, I need to head off to Far Harbor so that I can, of course, get a harpoon gun. I got assaulted by some creature when I got to the Nakano residence, which they just bullied and beat to death for me, so I didn't really have to do it. Getting to Far Harbor is pretty simple. I basically just walk around and pretend to be a detective, and then get on a boat and go over to Far Harbor. Now, I'm not going to be completing Far Harbor or really playing any of the DLC for this run, since that's not what the video is about. I will, however, be using this gun for Far Harbor in the future. For now, though, I have to just kind of sit here and let the residents of Far Harbor kind of just kill all of the enemies for me, since I can't do much myself. I pretty much just had to sit here for around 10 minutes until everything was dead, and then I could go barter for a harpoon gun. I did think about using the unique one for this challenge, but I figured that was kind of breaking the game a little bit since enemies aren't really gonna never not be full health, and doing basically double damage permanently with a weapon that already has an insanely high base damage stat seemed a little bit, kind of cheating for this run, so we're not going to do that. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the harpoon gun. I've tried to use this weapon a few times before in average playthroughs, but I just despise this weapon for some reason. I don't know why. I'm gonna kind of just blame it on the fact that the gunner sights for the heavy weapons in Fallout 4 aren't really that great, and they make aiming with anything that is like this, a one-shot weapon that has an insanely long reload speed, a pretty much pain in the ass to do. I'm not a huge fan of this weapon, I will not make that a secret, but I'm going to try my best to come to love it over the course of this run. Of course, I headed over to Trudy and killed Wolfgang and friends so that I could get some free caps. For some reason, I had an insane amount of excess caps after selling off everything at Far Harbor, so I was pretty much set on items for the rest of this run, since I really only needed to buy stim packs. Normally, ammo would be a concern for these runs, but considering the harpoon gun has a variant with the flechette modification, you can basically get infinite ammo with this, considering it's pretty much a shotgun, and you can essentially recover basically anywhere from 2 to 5 harpoons for every one that you shoot. It costs 1 harpoon to shoot out a burst of 5 for some reason. I'm not going to argue with the logic there, but I'm gladly going to take the fact that I essentially have infinite ammo for the majority of this run until I got annoyed with the low travel speed of the flechette model and switched back to the regular harpoon around the end of the run. Now, moving on to the triggermen in the vault, and this is pretty much just me sitting behind cover and peeking out every couple seconds to take a pot shot and just pray that I hit somebody. The harpoon gun is really not great at range with the flechette model. You can't really do a whole lot considering it has such low velocity for traveling, and the fact that, the gunner sights make long-range combat pretty much impossible. I couldn't get the short scope until later into the run, since I had to be, I think, level 11 to get Gun Nut 2, which is where you get the short scope. And of course, with the flechette model, that really didn't help all that much in the long run until I swapped back to regular harpoons. But for the most part, this gun dishes out an insane amount of damage, so long as you can hit your shot, and there were even occasions when using the shotgun harpoon that I could kill 2 enemies with 1 shot if they were kind of right next to each other and I just placed my crosshair in the middle. Eventually, I rescued Nick and headed right back to Diamond City so that I could talk to Nick again, and then go to Kellogg's house. I had the key already, apparently. I'm pretty sure I just stole it as soon as I got to Diamond City. I honestly don't remember, considering I took a break multiple times during this run just for other things, but I went into Kellogg's house, robbed him blind, and then set off for Fort Hagen. Now, the thing is, the harpoon gun might not really be that great of a weapon, but it also doesn't help that I'm picking fights with literal cryptids, like Siren Head, where a harpoon gun with about 200 damage is doing 1/10 to 1/20th of his health bar. Yeah, I ran away from that fight real quick and just decided to go into Fort Hagen and then immediately got assaulted by some monsters. This was really my first kind of run-in with the monsters from the mods that I'm using, and it was kind of terrifying. Especially considering that this mod has a built-in function where it can randomly just make your entire game pitch black and spawn waves of monsters on you to fight in the middle of nowhere where you can barely see 2 feet in front of you. The synths were not really that big of an issue. I mean, none of the enemies were really that big of an issue in this run. The harpoon gun's downside isn't its damage, it's the fact that it has a very low fire rate, low reload speed, and it's just all around very hard to aim with. Kellogg died in one shot, the synths were dying in one shot. Due to the darkness from the mod, I could barely see the Brotherhood blimp, so I just went back to Diamond City and talked to Nick again, who, of course, told me to go off to Good Neighbor. Now, I normally just kind of find Good Neighbor earlier, usually around when I rescue Nick. I just discover it while I'm there, but I forgot to do that this time around, so I had to go pick some fights with some ghouls before making it to Good Neighbor and executing Finn on the spot. I don't think there's a single person that ever just doesn't go into Good Neighbor and execute Finn, unless it's possibly their first playthrough and they don't know what an asshole he is, but it's time for Kellogg's Memories. Yeah, it's going to be a hard skip for me, we're just going to move on. And this is exactly what I mean by the mod literally will make it pitch black and just spawn waves of monsters on you in the middle of nowhere. This is what happened to me on my way to the glowing sea. I was pretty much just getting harassed and trying to survive, which wasn't all that great. I couldn't see anything. I also decided that when I got to the glowing sea, since Siren Head had tracked me down yet again, I was going to pick a fight with him in the open with no cover and waste most of my healing items. I was, however, able to kill him, and he was worth a very good chunk of XP before making it to the Crater of Adam, where the children of Adam were getting harassed by monsters as well, and I decided, you know what, this isn't my problem, so I killed a couple of the monsters and then just kind of left so that I could go talk to Virgil. Virgil is pretty much the same as usual, blah blah blah, go to Green Tech Genetics and kill a Courser. So off to Green Tech Genetics I went. This was probably one of the hardest runs I've had in Green Tech, just because in such close range, I'm kind of at the mercy of my healing items and hiding behind things while I reload, especially with how inaccurate I feel the harpoon gun is. I don't know why, but I would have my crosshairs directly on an enemy, I'd fire, they just wouldn't take damage, the harpoons wouldn't register and hit them, or they would just go to their side. It just kind of sucked sometimes. I really don't know why this weapon seems so inaccurate. There's a great example right there where I had my crosshair perfectly on an enemy, but considering it was an enemy from a mod, it could have also just been a glitched hitbox, which is entirely possible and also might not be the gun's fault. See, I thought about letting the railroad live as well, but then I figured executing them would be a lot funnier, so I proceeded to die about 6 times trying to execute them because I make poor decisions in these runs. Yeah, Glory is kind of a pain in the ass when I'm stuck in a corner with a gun that has the slowest reload speed known to man. So after that, and I had the Courser chip analyzed, I went back to Concord to help Preston out because I figured the Minutemen are my best bet for building the teleporter relatively easily. Nothing in here was really all that challenging, all the raiders died pretty much immediately, and I didn't have to take too much damage, and then I went outside and got assaulted by a Deathclaw that had somehow turned into a Wendigo. Yeah, that was pretty terrifying to see that thing bust out of the sewers, but on the bright side, I found an infinite harpoon glitch by just shooting this one Minuteman corpse over and over again. I'm not entirely sure why this specific corpse allows me to do this, since a lot of other corpses don't, but I'm not going to question it, and I will take the free harpoon. Now, it was time for me to relay into the Institute, and this is where this run starts to kind of fall apart a little bit. So, I had to, obviously, build the teleporter and relay into the Institute, which I was using the Minuteman for, and I was going to just leave it at that. I was going to side with the Institute because I figured fighting the Brotherhood with a harpoon gun sounded like a good challenge. As soon as I got into the Institute, I went to take a break and stopped my recording. By the time I came back and started the next recording, the game kind of had a stroke and that recording got corrupted. As you can see, I have an exit save from about 5 hours of playtime where I had already beaten the game with the Institute. That entire recording was corrupted. From the moment that I relayed into the Institute, doing the entire Institute questline and beating the game, that recording was corrupted. That recording did not exist anymore. So when I loaded back in, I was pretty much upset, considering that recording got corrupted at like 2 in the morning, and I needed to obviously re-record the entire game. So I just went ahead and did the Minuteman. See, I really wasn't too keen on having to actually, play through the game more, because I really wasn't a fan of this weapon, and I was pretty annoyed that I had to do this again, so I swapped back to the gunner sights, because the short scope was just kind of aggravating, started clearing out settlements, putting down the beacons, blah blah blah, you know how the Minuteman questline goes, except it wasn't actually that bad this time around because it didn't break on me. I was actually able to trigger every Minuteman questline normally and successfully without too many issues, which was absolutely fantastic for me because it meant that I didn't have to sit and fuck around with console commands for an hour trying to figure out why the game was broke. Something that I think is a little bit of a missed opportunity for the Harpoon gun is I think it would have been a interesting modifier to have it do extra damage to Mirelurks or Mirelurk queens, because they're like sea creatures, and the Harpoon gun is like, for hunting sea creatures. I think it would have been kind of neat if it had like a little hidden modifier that it did extra damage to those types of enemies, but whatever. I spent some time waiting and went back to the castle, and oh my god, Ronnie Shaw was actually here without any issues, so I could actually progress the Minuteman questline. It was so fantastic, on top of the recording corrupting, to just finally have the Minuteman questline work for me and not have to sit there and deal with the game breaking on me after my recording had already broke on me. Sarge went down without really too many issues. I did blow my legs off a couple times with landmines, but for the most part, the rest of the game was going relatively smooth. I got the artillery quest out of the way, the defend the castle quest actually triggered normally for once, and I could actually do it without having to mess with console commands yet again. I don't know why this quest, out of all of them, seems to always bug out the most for me, but I'm just glad that it was actually working this time around. I felt pretty useless on this version of the quest though, because I couldn't see for one, due to the mods making the game pretty much the equivalent of playing Fallout 4 as Helen Keller, and I just kind of had to sit there and let the NPCs do most of the work since the Harpoon gun had an awful reload time. With that out of the way, I could go back and talk to Sturgis and actually get into the Institute. For some reason, on my way there, my frames just absolutely tanked. I don't know if it was due to the weather and the mod acting up. It just went back to normal after a couple seconds, but that was pretty weird. Haven't really had to deal with that before. Normally Fallout 4 actually, despite, its issues, doesn't actually really run that bad on my PC. My PC is a bit above average in terms of specs, but I'm just glad that Fallout 4 doesn't decide to kill itself with the frame rate every 12 seconds. In the Institute, everything is pretty normal. I just kind of walked around and killed synths with the Harpoon gun. I had a bunch of NPCs to help me here, so I again, kind of felt pretty useless. It wasn't as bad as the castle though, because I was in close quarters, which meant that I could actually see things and shoot things properly. Although I did struggle a bit when I got to the reactor room, because that one goddamn legendary synth with the rocket launcher kept blowing my legs off. I think I got my legs, or just arms, head, whatever, my entire body pretty much crippled about 12 times here, because for some reason I could not hit this one synth. I spent at least 5 minutes being stubborn and just trying to shoot him specifically from this window, and I kept failing. So I of course had to blow through most of my healing items, but eventually the bomb was planted, I left the Institute, I pressed the big shiny red button and blew up the Institute, and I could not see the actual explosion. But with that, I beat Fallout 4 with only the Harpoon gun. It's kind of a shame that I didn't get to show you guys the Brotherhood ending, because it was insanely hectic. The entire thing was just, that entire last Brotherhood quest was absolutely crazy, trying to do it with the Harpoon gun. For some reason, the game decided to spawn 3 times the normal amount of Brotherhood soldiers, so it was kind of a struggle. But as always, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you have any suggestions, please leave them down in the comments below. This was actually pretty much community voted by you guys, so thank you for helping me torture myself with this run. But, in the end, it wasn't that bad of a challenge, and I do recommend giving the Harpoon gun a try, if for nothing else, to simply use one of the funner weapons in Fallout 4.